G'day, Josh.
Hey mate, how are you, Paul?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad.
How's your week been?
Yeah, pretty busy, mate. Just trying to get everything done before Christmas. Another week to go.
Yeah, I know. Everything sort of slows, well, not slows down, but everyone's quickening up to slow down, aren't they? It's funny. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I was reluctant to do one tonight, but I thought we'd wrap it up anyway, get a few people on and have a bit of a chat. So,
Yeah, good stuff.
Hey Josh, hey Dylan, it's Adam here. How are you?
Good,
okay.
Adam. How are you, mate?
Good mate, good. Just
Good
watching the
to-
cricket. Old head just got these 100.
Yeah, saw that. How good's that? He's having a good summer.
It's a bit quicker
This
than
is,
Smith.
this is the third test already.
Yeah.
God, there's hardly any days between tests now, is there? Like, I'm in Hawaii, so I sort of lose track of the cricket, but there's hardly any days, is there?
Yeah, it's pretty. They got a full-on schedule now. How long you been in Hawaii for, Dylan?
It's Paul.
Paul, sorry.
Yes, actually, and I'm like, because I'm on Dylan's computer because he can't make
Yep.
it. So we bought a house here about 12 years ago,
Yep.
and we've sort of moved here full time. About nearly 3 years ago now. So, I mean, we're always going to come here at some point. So, it's a good spot because Dylan's actually in Benora Point, and Tyler, my other son, lives in Melbourne.
Yep.
So it's good. And Tammy's from California, so her mum's um, she's in just near San Jose, which we can fly into San Jose as well, which is good.
And how do you find the from living in Australia, the culture to now living in Hawaii, the difference of you finding
Yeah,
that you
good question. I think probably one of the biggest things is just the enormity of the country. Like, I think that's probably the first thing that hits you, how big America is, like, and the opportunity.
yeah
I think culturally it's quite similar, like food wise, restaurants, lifestyle. It's not a dramatic difference. Yeah, obviously everyone speaks English, but there's
yeah
also it's sort of like 50 different countries a bit. I don't know how much time you spent over here, mate, but it's sort of a
yeah.
little bit like that, like it's sort of 50
It's
different
crazy.
different cultures. It's
Even with the election, when you don't realize how big it is until you see the maps and the states and how people are and all the different rules and areas, and you just realize how big it is.
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a sort of good example because what do I got to do here? Even that, like, yeah, just going through a few elections now, and even the electoral system rather than our system. So there are probably differences as well. So there are some obvious differences politically. Like, we vote for a party, they vote for a person. Um, you know, but generally speaking, I think the other thing you probably notice is just this. You generally can get ahead over here. Like, you can,
Yeah,
like 1% of the market is 3 million. Which is sort of 10% of the Australian market. So you just notice,
yeah.
so many entrepreneurs, so much opportunity, stuff like that. So as I said, there's sort of subtle differences, but and enough to sort of notice and
You miss the Sydney life? Because you're in Sydney most of the time, weren't you? Most of your
well, I
life,
sort of grew
the
up in
swans and
Melbourne.
stuff.
I grew up in Melbourne, and then moved to Sydney for 20 something years. Even that, mate, like, it's funny going back to Australia now. Like, hey, Jared,
Hi, Paul. How you going?
good, mate. Going back to Australia now, like, you sort of go back as a tourist. And I
Yeah,
always felt there was a big difference between Sydney and Melbourne, but I probably notice it even more now. Like, Sydney is a great tourist place. Like, it really is. Like, it's a world-class city. But I go back there and I go, geez, it'd be hard to live here. Like, it's so busy now. Like,
oh yeah,
it
and
really is.
expensive.
And so expensive, like ridiculously expensive, like, to the point where, like, one bedroom apartment in Randwick's, 900 to a million, million. Whereas Melbourne's probably a bit more livable, but then the weather and I tell you what I do love is where Dylan's moved to up at Benora Point, which is just near Kingscliff. I don't know whether you
Yep,
spend.
yeah, on the Gold Coast. Yep.
Yeah, you're
So
in Gold Coast. Yeah,
yeah,
So I actually really like it up there. It's actually
even Kingscliff was nothing, right? And now all of a sudden there's millions of homes, and it's
and
expensive and everything.
the new hospital there at Tweed.
Yep.
So it's that I really like that because it's got good weather and it's still close to Coolangatta Airport. I think when you get out of Melbourne, you do notice the weather. That's probably the thing that when I was in Sydney for 20 years, it was sort of like I didn't grow up in Melbourne, mate. You don't. It's no big deal, to be honest. I remember playing footy in 5-degree weather and raining and Zerdy's Oval at bloody Beverly Hills and mate. But as a kid, when
Yeah.
I went to Sydney, I remember going back to coach Melbourne, and during winter, I was saying because most of the guys come with me from Sydney, Georgie Stone, Benny Matthews, they're all Swans. We're going, mate, I got a wind cheater and long pants on, and it was, and I don't know. I don't know what you guys feel like. Like Jared,
What you get accustomed to.
yeah, it's what you get. Hey, Adam, how are you? What you get accustomed to. I mean, Jared, you're up on the. I mean, Adam's in Perth. Josh, where are you, Josh? What part are you?
Leichhardt in Sydney, mate, inner west.
Yeah, I knew you in Sydney.
Yeah.
But yeah, Leichhardt.
Inner west at Leichhardt, yeah.
Inner west. Because Jared's
I'm in
up.
Melbourne.
You Melbourne, Adam? Whereabouts?
Yeah, Melbourne.
Where in Melbourne?
Hyatt, but grew up in McKinnon.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jared's up. Jared's further north. He's Townsville, so he gets all the good weather.
No, mate, I was born in rural Victoria, grew up on the sunny coast, and now live in a little place called Emu Park. So gateway to the Great Barrier Reef, but Great Keppel Island just sitting out off us.
Great Keppel, yeah, beautiful. But I tell you what, the weather. Well, we better get started in a minute. But it's always good. I mean, it's having a chat anyway. But do notice, it's funny, Josh. You would notice as well, and Jared and Adam. You do eat differently when you're in a warmer climate. There's no doubt about that. Like no doubt. Like when you go back to Melbourne, like my eating habits change significantly to Hawaii. And I think it's because you're inside. It's you're sort of comfort eating more, a bag of chips and watching a movie sort of thing. Whereas it is different. I know what you find, Jared. Living up north, whether your eating habits change a lot. But in Hawaii, like honestly, we're out every single day. Like doing stuff.
I don't know whether I should say this, but is warmer weather more conducive to having an ale?
I don't know.
Yeah, well,
I'm not a massive drinker, but that's actually a good point. I don't. Possibly, is it? Yeah, it's a good question.
They're very cultural. There's a few breweries locally that are busy today, I can tell you.
Yeah. No, exactly. All right, let's get started because I'll just hit record so I can record it for everyone else. So there's a few questions I want to sort of chat about, which is good. So, Josh, your question about the succession plan I thought was a good one. So I reckon because it's pretty topical. So at both Adams, I'm sure you understand the Swans. Adam, are you a big AFL fan? No, you more rugby league?
Yeah, I'm rugby league on the Yep, definitely.
So what's happened with John Longmire just handed it over to Dean Cox in a succession plan. And I handed it over to John Longmire about 14 years ago. So Josh, maybe extrapolate on that question because I thought that was a good question to sort of kick off as well.
Yeah, it's in the context of successful organisations, and you can look at any successful organisations. The Swans are great, Geelong are great, and when you're talking about the AFL, and they've been probably the two most successful clubs, without a doubt, in terms of being able to stay at the top of the game and be in that final series and be competitive the whole time. And that's on the basis, in my view, of how they are able to succession plan not only the players on the ground, but their C-suite, their board, their senior coach, the coaching, the support teams, and I do a lot of stuff behind the scenes with the Swans, but you can even see the succession planning within the medical departments, within the business operations departments, and so forth. And you can also see good businesses I've worked in where the succession plan is in place. People know who's next in line. And I've worked in other organisations where it's an absolute basket case, and it really impacts on culture. It impacts on leadership capability. It impacts on bottom line. So there's a whole range of things where a poor succession plan, a poor HR strategy, really impacts on an organisation. So my question to Paul in the chat was, what do you think makes Geelong and Sydney so successful in that whole succession piece where other clubs, and we're talking big clubs, you know, your Collingwoods, your Carltons, and these sorts of clubs in the AFL have not been successful?
Yeah, I think the starting point, maybe I'll go back to my theory a bit. I remember as a player, and I suspect I'll defer to you guys on the call as well, but I always felt like a coach had a shelf life. And the reason I felt as a player, there was sort of a message, and then the message got, you know, and I just had this theory that it was sort of 7 or 8 years. Now that was without a premiership. So I always had this theory, like if you, because you have an opportunity to lead, you know, I think you should always be striving for the absolute best, knowing, and I've said this to Rossi Lyon before, like the only difference between Rossi Lyon and I is the ball bounces one way in front of, was it Snides or Milne or whatever it was, and whereas Leo Barry takes that mark and it doesn't drop down. So what I'm saying is give or take. G'day, Travis. How are you, mate? Good to see you.
G'day, guys. Sorry I'm late. Just
No,
wouldn't let me in to start with. I was just going through the regular channel. Then I worked. You had to get into the Academy one. Yep, all good.
No worries. We're just talking about succession plans. Josh asked a question in the chat around the Sydney succession plan. So I think that was for me the starting point. There's probably other couple of things, Josh, I wanted to highlight as well. The other thing I sort of always thought is if you build a reasonable culture, why do you always go outside the organisation to get another CEO? Like I could never work a coach. I could never work out why every single time a coach got sacked, a coach came from another club. Those sort of things just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And then I think the other thing is why are you in the job? I think, and this probably talks to the leadership and a lot of the academy stuff that you guys would have already done. But the things that I really harp on is, why are you in the job? Really, as a CEO, as a business leader, as a business owner, whoever it is, you're really only there to make the players better. That's the only role that you play, really. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're head of Nike or head of Nissan or head of the Sydney Swans. Your role, and I think it's a role we don't take seriously enough. Adam, I loved your thing on Craig Bellamy, which was really pertinent to this conversation as well. Like you talked about Craig Bellamy, but that communication. I know what Bellamy does, having worked in the same building and he puts all his rookie players, I think it's a 2-week program where they have to do this. I think it's almost like a boot camp for 2 weeks. Yeah. And he has this philosophy about making them better people. So I think if that's the starting point, then Josh, I reckon that end result is easier. But, and I'll ask you guys this question because you would have worked for some, but what do you think? Let's say every leader starts with that. I want to be a great coach. I've got 7 or 8 years. I want everyone to be. What do you think happens in that period? So if everyone starts with that same philosophy as I did, and John Long, what do you guys think happens to the leaders? Because there's a few obvious things that jump out to me. What do you reckon they are?
Or change, like starting off with just changing everything. Like it's brand new. It's all a new scenario that's opening up, and the unknown becomes relevant again.
Well, I think you plan it. They don't have a strategy, so they really don't have a strategy to make it work. So if I'm going to let's say we're a company on this call, the 6 of us. I should have a strategy, or Josh, if Josh is the leader, he should have a strategy. Now, that strategy should include personal development, us getting better, but all those sorts of things. I think that's number one. But I also feel like it's ego. I feel like I mean, we all love a buck. We all love a dollar, don't we? To be honest, we all have to feed our kids and we all have to put food on the table and all that sort of stuff. And we all like, I guess, a bit of adoration, being the boss or whatever. And I think a lot of it is that, we tend to lose our way, Josh, a bit in regard to, where we want to get to and how we want to get there. And I think, then there's the honor system. I reckon, and I say this all the time, like leadership is hard, guys. It really is. Even the chats that we're having on school and the conversations, the honesty around that, I reckon it's fantastic because Dexter's been great. Dexter's was probably the first one on the course, which is awesome. And even reading some of his stuff, I don't know if you caught up with him in school, like it is pretty brutal when you put a mirror up to yourself, how am I going as a leader? So it's easy to sort of bluff yourself a bit and go, I'm going okay, no, that'll be fine. But the reality is, if you're holding that mirror up, and I was talking to John Longmire the day, Josh, that he sent me a text message and said, Bruce, I just want to let you know I'm giving it away. I'm like, shit, I was actually on a workshop. And I was literally sitting in this room, and I had to be careful because I picked up my phone because it's John Longmire. I'm like, what? So there was a bit of a break, and I quickly read it. I've gone, shit. Yeah, that's. So I rang him straight back afterwards. He said, mate, I'm just cooked. So I think it's that self-awareness piece is really important as a leader. So they're probably the main things, Josh, I reckon. But I think it's a great conversation. So I'm open to some, anyone that you've seen maybe thought was going to hand over or thought was a good leader, then got caught up in ego, got caught up in the prestige of the job, just sort of thought, well, I'll hang on because you know what? And the other problem, Josh, I reckon, when you start hanging on, you stop doing your job really, don't you? If we're really honest, because we start hanging on and we stop doing what we're really employed to do. But feel free, anyone to jump in, definitely.
Just on that one, sorry guys.
You go.
It was interesting. Thanks. It was interesting. You said 6 or 7 years. I got some advice from a mentor of mine in the different roles I've performed within law enforcement. Yep. And he said, if you're in a senior role, 5 years max. 12 months to get your head around understand the role. 3 years to embed yourself in that role and achieve your strategy. And another 12-month period to identify who your successor is. So you can you have that handover period, and that gives the continuity in those particular roles. Now you need that in tactical or operational environments. But interestingly, you've gone 6 or 7 years at that head coach level, which I think is probably about right. And I certainly agree with that because it gives you the opportunity to, especially if you're successful, because you're breeding a whole new cadre of people coming through your coaching staff, and then they can go off and do their own coaching in other locations, as well as the squad of players you're bringing through. So it's the 5 to 7 mark. I think you're right on the money.
I think the other thing too is this, and Adam, I'll jump to you in a minute, but I think you can reinvent your role, which I think is really important. So at the same role, and when I talked to Melbourne, my role at Melbourne Footy Club was different. My role at Sydney was very much the coach, whereas my role at Melbourne was really more of a foreman, really more of a CEO role. Does that make sense? So I think you can stay longer, but you have to have the awareness that I'm going to promote Travis. Mate, Trav, I want you to be 2IC. I don't care what, and sometimes we get caught up in the names of the roles, but Trav, you're the CEO, mate. I'm going to oversee everything. I'm going to head up culture. I'm going to make sure I'm in all the meetings, and which is pretty much what I did at Melbourne. I had the right people, Josh, as I said, Georgie Stone, Daniel McPherson, Brett Allison, Benny Matthews, all Sydney guys that I knew would be able to do the technical stuff. So I think you can reinvent yourself, but again, I'll be honest about that as well. Okay, guys, succession plan, we're not quite up to it now, and I reckon that's what John Longmire did with Dean Cox. So for Rugby Adam, because there's 2 Adams on the call, Dean Cox has just been appointed. He's been there 7 years. And I think what John did is probably what you're saying, Josh. After 5 years, rather than giving it away, I reckon John's gone, rightio, after 7 or 8, Coxie's here. We're going to groom him. We're going to give him a chance. I'll still do these particular roles,
but we'll make sure we and I reckon that's a good way to do it as well. The main thing is whatever that senior person is doing, making sure they're doing their role, whatever that role is, because people can see through you pretty quickly. Oh, Ruzzi's in at 10 o'clock today. He's left at 2. I remember when the CEO of the AFL, Andrew Demetrio, there were stories about him when in his last couple of years where he's dropping kids off at school at 9:30, not getting in till 10:30. So again, that's okay if you've adjusted your role accordingly. So I think it gets back to role description and things like that. So Adam, do you want to jump in? So you had a question before.
Mate, I was just, again, I guess business sometimes different to sport, but you just think about the simple things of, on my leader report, the last couple of weeks, I had Wayne Bennett and Craig Bellamy and, even you have Steve Waugh, right? They all have that simplistic way of actually, being a leader, showing by the front, making sure people care for you, you care for people. And I don't know, you just look at Craig Bellamy, he had the Melbourne Storm, and the salary cap and the amount of players they lose year in, year out who go get big money, but every year he's in the top 8 or getting to the finals. You're thinking there must be you can't fake that. Maybe the first year, second year you might fluke it, but you can't continuously, year on, year out. There's a thing about, I don't know, showing that care or having that down to earth conversations that doesn't make them technical, just really breaking it down and finding out who the people are and where their strengths are.
Mate, 100%. As I said, I think what you talk about communication and collaboration, and I think module 10 I'm going to do is on empowerment and collaboration. But there's no question, guys, as I've moved more into the corporate space over the last 7 or 8 years, it's so much more complicated. I think because, and I'm all for education, but people go off and do these MBAs at Harvard and, you talk to them what you learn on, PowerPoints and this and that. And in all honesty, the 2 coaches I work with, David Noble at North Melbourne, and I heard Simon Goodwin when David Noble was so complicated, guys, so complicated. He had PowerPoint presentations, and I remember pre-game, I watched him because I worked with him for 12 months, and I didn't understand. I remember at one of the games it was about round 6 or 7. We'd lost to North Melbourne. We lost to Kangaroos by over 100 points. And I went up to him at halftime, and I remember saying, and I didn't butt in much. I knew what my lane was, and I was there to help him, mainly talk to him during the week. And they were about 80 points down at halftime. I remember I went up to him at halftime. I said, no, what do you want the young players to do? Because he had so many tactics, and he had a star next to someone. So if he came on the ground, had to go to half forward, then half back, and then midfield, then wing, and all that. And it was just super complicated. And I said, mate, what do you want them to do? He goes, just play. I said, mate, I'm telling you, they're confused. Anyway, after the game, they lost by over 120, 130 points. And I just sat up in the back, and they were just in there with the coaches, and they said, look, why aren't they learning? What are we doing wrong? And I just waited for a little bit. And then I jumped in. I said, guys, no, it's too complicated. It is so complicated. I've been involved in footy for 40 years, Nopes. I don't understand it. And he jumped down my throat a little bit. To be fair, by the Wednesday, we had a really good conversation. So, Adam, again, if I get back to the modules, and I reckon what Bellamy's done really well is had a really good idea of what he wants, a really clear structure around how he wants to do it, both technically from a game plan, and then culturally from the point of view of collaboration and behaviours and getting to know people and relationships and all those sorts of things. And I think that's got to be the starting point. And that's why I started with that module, because I think for me, as much as I didn't want to do the presentation to the board, and I thought, I won 6 games and you should give me the job, it was the best thing that happened, because I had to get out of my head. And what I noticed with Nobes, he had it all in his head, because he did a great presentation. He presented to the board. His pedigree was amazing. He'd been assistant coach. He'd coached his own team, the under-18s, and at local level. He'd been in recruiting. He'd been the general manager of football, but he just couldn't get out of his head onto practicality. And I reckon, Adam, that's what you're talking about with Craig Bellamy. Like, he's just a really practical, and you're going to love. I've got Ivan Cleary coming on mid-January. And one of the things he said, I was at a function recently, I got to spend about a week with him, which was awesome. And I've written it down. Actually, ironically, you brought up Bellamy a bit because he talked about action, not just knowing. And it really summed it up for me, guys. And because people forget that I think it was his 11th year that he won a premiership. Now, if you didn't know as much about rugby league probably as you do, Adam, and if you asked a Victorian, they'd certainly know Penrith had won 4. But if you said, how many years has Ivan Cleary coached? They'd probably say,
Ivan who?
Yeah. Well, they'd probably say, well, he won 4 premierships. So has he coached for 6 years, 7 years? 11 years before his first premiership. And what he talked about is he knew it, but he wasn't acting it. And he made a really good point of that. And then I started actioning it. And he talked about setting up behaviours, a really simple culture, building strong relationships. So all those things, Adam, that you've touched on. So it's a great point. Anyone else want to jump in? Yeah, Adam, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, and what about on the other side with the approach from the person moving into that role? So like the Dean Cox of the world, how are they approaching it? How long in advance are they actually thinking about it? What do they need to do? Because it feels like they're probably going to deal with a lot of, backtracking their own ego, patience, learning, also coaching and showing what they're made of. But, how are they working into the mix from the start for their own journey?
Yeah, look, I think with Dean, and this is, I'll answer this 2 ways. I think he's as well placed as anyone to get into the role, because what John would have done is given him pre-season games to coach. Yeah, he would have been to board meetings. Yeah, things that assistant coaches don't normally get to do. Yeah, sitting in recruiting meetings. So he would have been set up. Now, the second answer to that question is, mate, what you don't know is how they're going to react on game day. Yeah, and that's the biggest unknown. And that's why the 25 points that I wrote down for me were so important, because all of you on this call, we have to hold ourselves accountable first and foremost as leaders. We do, and even it's great some of the conversation that we're having on school and some of the learnings, particularly Jared mentioning your daughter, and I think Dexter said the same thing, even interactions where we've got to apologise, look, I was probably wrong, I shouldn't have done that. Most leaders don't want to do that, and I wouldn't have been able to hold myself accountable, had I not had this. That's right here. Look at this. Here it is. Here, I've still got it. Like, it literally, that's the piece of paper I printed off. Now, I wouldn't have been able to, and I'll go down to a couple of them. Be specific at quarter time, half time, 3/4 time by readdressing strategies. Just don't verbally abuse. Don't fly off the handle after a game. If too emotional, wait till Monday. That was written, guys, as you know, as a player. So I hope Dean's done something like that. And I don't think David did. I don't think David knew how to handle the pressure. And the irony was David wasn't even expected to win. He didn't even have to win games of football. But I don't think he had something to hold himself accountable. Does that make sense, Adam? So I reckon Dean's really well placed in terms of as much education as he could possibly have. But I hope he's got something that he's able to draw on, in those real high pressure times, because they're coming. They're coming. They came for Ivan Cleary. They came for Bellamy during the salary cap. Adam, you mentioned, they came for John Longmire at the end, even though he was playing in grand finals. They came for Bomber Thompson, who withstood it. They came for Damien Hardwick before he won 3. So they're coming. It's not a question of are they coming? It's a question of when they're coming. So I think that's the other thing, is how does he hold himself accountable? And surrounding yourself with good people is really important. And that's the other thing about the corporate space. Sometimes it confuses me a bit. If you've got an executive team, use it. Use the executive team. Like, you're not expected as a leader. Like, Dean Cox Tom Harley's not expecting Dean Cox. Tom Harley's the CEO, guys. He's not expecting Dean Cox to know everything. But what he is expecting Dean Cox to do is ask Jared McVeigh, Ask Brett Kirk, who's there. Ask Mark McVeigh. Guys, how can we do this better? And I reckon that's one thing, and that's why I want to do this thing on empowerment and collaboration, because sometimes we work too much in isolation. Great footy clubs don't work in isolation. Great footy clubs, Josh, you mentioned it. If you look at Sydney, it's not only a succession plan of the coaches, me into John Longmire into Dean Cox. It's now, how Tommy Harley got to where he's got to. Leon Cameras come from GWS. He went into the academy. He's now general manager of football. So everyone tends to help each other and move each other around. So Adam, does that answer your question okay?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just adding on to that. It's like, how much is Dean thinking about a succession plan though? Like, is he going, because obviously there was a West Coast job at the same time where he probably was favored to get that at the end of the day if he wanted to, but he declined that. And at that stage, John Longmire had not, this whole situation had not occurred. So Dean's obviously in his own mind going, I have a choice here to make. Do I stay and, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years down the track? Do I move in, start my own career now? Maybe I'm successful, maybe I'm not. There's a lot that you've probably got to consider to be able to be in a position like that and really not necessarily put your life on hold, because I feel like you're still doing what you love, but really putting, things above other things that would just create maybe a better future. And it probably stems very similar to like a backup quarterback in that case.
Yeah. No, again, that's why I believe so strongly in culture, because if we can get the culture right, and I can only talk from my time in football, and it's probably changed slightly now, but I don't think dramatically. I've never seen footballers change for money, really. Because if you get in a good culture, if you look at, and Josh has mentioned, Sydney, Geelong, I know of plenty of Sydney players that have taken pay cuts. I know of plenty of Geelong players that have taken pay cuts. I know of plenty of Hawthorn players in that era have taken pay cuts. So I think if you get your culture right, Adam, it doesn't really matter. And also, rather than thinking of, I never really thought, I didn't go into work thinking, year 1, 2, or 3, there's going to be a succession plan. But what I thought about, if we can create a really good culture, then someone within this organisation should be able to step up at some point. And if we can have that philosophy and have that theory, never be scared about someone taking their own job, because if they're taking your own job, in all likelihood they're probably helping you keep your job for a couple of years because they're so good at what they're doing. And believe me, the AFL went through a system where when I was playing, I guarantee this, senior coaches used to employ terrible assistant coaches because they didn't want their jobs to be taken. And that was another lesson I learned. I was going, why have we got such bad assistant coaches here? This is ridiculous. If you want to keep your job, wouldn't you employ really good people? So if we get our system, that's why I believe we can systemize culture. If we systemize our culture, then those things, Adam, will look after itself. Dean, and I firmly believe that when Dean knocked back the West Coast job, he probably didn't know when he was going to get the Sydney job, to your point. But what I do know, love being at the footy club, love going to work every day, love being in Sydney. That's the only thing that he cared about. So again, now there's going to be some anomalies. There's going to be some people that just go from job to job for the money. But do we want them in our organisation? Probably not. Do we? Not really.
No.
And I'm not suggesting at the time that they're there, they're not going to be useful employees. But that's not to say we want everyone to stay as well. Because I guarantee the person that does leave, not for money, what do? They come, they knock on the door, they walk in the office and go, Ruzi, mate, I don't want to go, but this opportunity is too good. I'll tell you a story about Alistair Lynch. So Adam, Alistair Lynch was a teammate of mine. Everyone else, Trav, Lynchy, Jared, you would know Lynchy, Josh would know. So Alistair was a teammate. And at the state, he was the best player in the AFL, or top 3. And I remember this. He got an offer for Brisbane Lions 10 years for $2.5 million. A 10-year offer at 25 2.5 million. This is back in 1990, end of 93, 94. And I was captain of Fitzroy at the time. And he came to me and said, Brucey, mate, what do I do? I said, Lynchy, you have to go. Like, I was captain of the club. I said, mate, you have to go. This is too good an opportunity. So does that make sense? So even in a good culture with good people, they might not want to leave, but they're going to leave for the right reasons. Or if they leave for the wrong reasons, you probably don't want them there anyway. All right. And I think that's when I talk about just the lessons of leadership and systemizing culture. And if we get that right, whether it's you stepping away, you empowering someone else, you perhaps just changing your role a bit and giving someone else a bit of an opportunity, it'll all work out. But if we don't systemize it, then it just becomes way too ad hoc. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. The couple
I just got one more question on this.
Yeah, go.
But
Yeah.
we can move on.
Yep.
I was going to ask, what about like, and again, could be a little bit controversial depending on your opinion on this, but so the AFL have pretty much just gone through a succession plan, even though they went out to tender, essentially. That looks like it's probably more exposed the culture through the succession plan than actually making the right choice. Is that kind of when you see maybe there's a bigger problem when you brought internally, but then it obviously just destroyed its own self? Is that something that then there's bigger issues than none when you have kind of gone through the right processes and things like that, but you're not really coming out better on the other end? Again, controversial, my opinion on that. Yeah. Everyone's got their own thoughts on the AFL.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point. How do I answer that tactfully? I mean, everyone has this. Again, I've gone through this in module 2. I think we all have an understanding of a culture, don't we? Like, culture travels. If I said to you, Travis, give us 3 words to describe the AFL, what would your 3 words be?
Corporate. I would say inclusive, or trying to be, in brackets before that, inclusive, and dominant.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Jared, what do you got? Give us 3 words to describe the AFL.
AFL from a distance. I like the word corporate, Travis. I think that was spot on. But I've probably got to think about it. You put me on the spot.
Yeah. Okay. But so again, Josh, you jump in, or either Adam. But no one's jumping out and going professional, supportive, empathetic, are they? Like, none of us are going to roll those words off the tongue. So that's my point. Culture travels. We've spoken about, Josh, you have so much respect for Sydney, but if you describe the Sydney culture, professional, supportive,
winning,
and successful. Yeah. Ivan Cleary, Craig Bellamy, Adam, you've mentioned it. Yeah. How do you describe the Storm? Yeah. Same thing. Professional, supportive, systematic. So I guess, in answer to your question, Adam, I would say if you polled 100 people, you would get very few that would have an extremely high opinion of the AFL. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my point is, I don't think they really care. You know, that's Travis. You mentioned dominant. I'll tell you a story. I was lucky in 2005. I won the Australian Coach of the Year for the Australian Sports Awards. So I went to, and I literally had no preconceived ideas about this question. We were backstage, and the president of the awards, the company that gave out the awards, or the national body, and I literally just said, "How do you find the AFL?" Oh my God, he slaughtered them, absolutely slaughtered the AFL, and I was even shocked. You know what I'm saying? So again, I really like Andrew Dillon. So I'm going to separate this AFL era of Demetrio and Gill to now, because I think he's more genuine person. But again, overall, I think there's been, you mentioned the word dominant, Travis. I think there's been, certainly under the previous two, there's certainly been a real intention to be a dominant, and not necessarily in a positive way. And I can speak to it because, like, being in Sydney, and even I think John Long might have made mention to it in his press conference. We have never been adverse. Swans have never been adversary to rugby league, rugby union. We've always tried to fit in, because we know rugby league dominant, rugby union probably less dominant than the league, but AFL is the third sport. So there was an intent. You mentioned inclusive, Travis. There's intent at the Sydney. We were lucky. We want to be inclusive. We want to be respectful of union and league and soccer, because we're definitely, but I don't think that's been. So I would answer it asking you guys rather than me answering it, because culture travels. We don't know much about Melbourne Storm, but Adam holds them in high regard, as he should. Most people don't know much about the Sydney Swans, but they hold them in high regard. Most people don't know much about Penrith Panthers. Again, I was lucky to spend time with Ivan Cleary. Now I know, because I've spent time with him, why they are. But most people, so see what I'm saying? Culture travels, doesn't it? And we're all going to have an opinion on what that culture is. So is that a good answer to the question, Adam, without getting too controversial?
Perfect. Love it. And it just makes it so simple, like 3 words to describe it. If you can't describe them in good, positive words, then that's culture. And that's where good culture shifts.
100%. And then, again, then you can be intentional around what your culture looks like. There's a lot of, probably the other questions I've had, why don't leaders intentionally become role models? So there's a fair bit of that chatter going on, and I'll ask you a question about that. Why do some leaders not see themselves as role models? That was a question. So maybe I'll hand that over to you guys. So Trev, do you want to start with that? So why do you think, because I get this a lot, why do you think a lot of leaders don't see themselves as role models or try to role model good behaviour?
I don't know. For me, with regards to my work and my position at the football club and that sort of thing, I would say that to be honest, that I do try and role model the behaviours and the actions and the standards that I would like to see in my team and colleagues and that sort of thing. So I guess it doesn't jump to me a direct answer to that question, because as I mentioned on that last post off the James Clear newsletter the other day, I know that that saying of the standard you walk past is your standard you set. I think came out of that fellow from the Australian Army a few years back. But so I'm a big believer in sort of walking the walk, to be honest.
The point I'm trying to make is, I think everyone starts with that, but then a lot of, Josh, Jared, you want to jump in, or either Adam? Because I reckon everyone starts with that philosophy, Trev, and I want to be a role model leader. And I reckon unintentionally they lose their way. And that's why the question was asked. Why don't they do it?
Okay.
And I'm happy to share my philosophies, because I agree. I think that's great.
For me, it comes back to, as we talked about when I was chatting with you and Dylan last week, it comes down to keeping things simple myself in order to be authentic and be genuine. I don't need to worry about what mask am I wearing in what situation and that. And I know that's a tact, especially and an important one. And when I say a tact, I don't mean it's a game or whatever, but it's sometimes absolutely necessary, especially amongst the senior corporate, the very senior corporate world. But for me, I'm not in that space. And even though I'm in a senior leadership role where I am working and that sort of thing, I find my authenticity is able to be easily bought into because of the fact that I'm consistent. And it's the consistency that actually is probably the hard part. Because you can be up and down in terms of your customer service or your
Stop you there. That's a great. That's one of them. It's hard to be consistent, mate. It's hard.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's really hard to be consistent because human nature, and it's interesting, Jared and I had a good conversation about the profiling, because we naturally gravitate to people we like. So even if we were a company on this, we were a startup, and for some reason, Jared and I played footy together for Beverly Hills, and we've known each other since human nature says that I'm probably going to let Jared get away with a bit more than I'll let you get away with. And that's that consistency part. So I reckon that's one thing, mate, that does stop us from being, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's intentionally that we're not going to be role models, but I think it's worthwhile because the question comes up a lot to me. Why are so many leaders not role models? Why do they have trouble role modeling that behavior?
So Paul, can I say just my 2 cents is it comes back to this, whether you talk about sport or business, the good coaches know that I might have been friends with you for ages, but if you're not pulling your own weight, you're gone. Whereas the other leader, he's friends with him still, so he'll do whatever he can to keep his friend in, instead of just actually calling a spade and actually put the business or the game first rather than the friendships. Does that make sense? So they know what they've got to accomplish, and that's the difference between getting a better result than trying to protect someone or try to take someone along the ride, even though they're not committed.
I think you're right there, Adam. And from my perspective, there, depending on your longevity of relationship with that person as your friend and all the rest of it, that has an impact there too. Because if you've been good mates with them for 5-10 years at the sporting company, or whatever, you've got the credits in the bank basically as trust that, in my opinion, would enable you to have a really good, honest, potentially even brutal heart-to-heart conversation, but still get to the other side with a positive outcome because of how you've been consistent over the journey. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to potentially going south because you've made that call or that decision.
Yep. And having the strength of the friendship to be able to have those conversations and not be too scared to have them.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you can't, well, then arguably you haven't really got that trust and the strength of the relationship.
Yeah, well,
if you're choosing to bail out and not have it, you know what I mean?
Mate, feedback's a gift. And when you go through the feedback module, feedback's a gift. It really is. But again, if we haven't set up a system of feedback, so if we don't know what am I giving feedback in, what's the person's role, what's our culture code, what does that look like, what are the technical KPIs, then it's a lot harder. It becomes more random. And that's that inconsistency, Travis, as well, because we haven't set up guardrails about how we're going to perform. Adam, I know you had your hand up there, mate, to jump.
You pretty much just answered that. Then I was just going to say, one thing I've been noticing a lot with leaders and the role model position as well is I don't feel like people really understand and the work-life balance at the moment, and being able to really intertwine them and separate it. Everyone's just very black and white on work, black and white on play kind of scenario. Yeah. So when it comes to a role model, you're kind of intertwining a bit where you're becoming more personable, understand. You're not always just telling and reacting. You're actually being more proactive and how can I help you? Whereas these days, everyone's got their own agendas in life where if I bring you into my agenda, are you going to be a positive to me? If you're a negative, don't want you, won't even try. And then it just kind of sucks the energy out of the whole, how do I look at you as a role model? Why would I look at you as a role model? And why do I even want to be here?
And that's that's the trust bucket that I talk about, the trust bank. Like Travis, you mentioned that. We know who we trust through their actions, but again, if we haven't sort of systemized our culture and we haven't again, footy clubs are great inducting players. I know when I was coaching Sydney, the leaders would induct the players into the culture. Guys, this is what's expected. And then it's easier if you don't have no guardrails. I'll tell you a quick story. I first started my company Performance by Design about 7 or 8 years ago. One of the first people that rang me, he rang me he said, "Oh, Ruzi, we had a good chat, and I explained what we did." And he said, "Oh, yeah, we had someone came in yesterday for a feedback session." And I said, "Oh, great." I said, "What was the feedback based around?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What was the feedback? Like, yeah, did you have some guardrails around the feedback?" He's like, "Nah." I said, "How did the session go?" He goes, "Terrible." I said, "No wonder it went terrible." Yeah, because it's just guesswork then, isn't it? Yeah, and then what I explained to him, you have to have a system of feedback. And again, this is part of the problem in the corporate world. We wait for 3 months and 6 months, and we sort of wait for this 3-month review or this 6-month review. Rather, the consistency, Trav, comes from we're going to regularly catch up. One of the things that and those who weren't on the call with Zach, make sure you look at that interview as well. But he talked about those Josh, I think you asked, was it Josh or Jared asked about the one-on-one meetings, I think it was. And he said, yeah, be really intentional around meeting people with one-on. So we have to have a system of feedback. Does that make sense? And I think that's why, because one of the things I find is if we're coaching other people, by osmosis, what does that do? It starts to hold us accountable. So if I'm asking Jared to do something, Jared, mate, you were late to that meeting the other day. You know, it starts at 9, you finished at 9:05. That holds me accountable, doesn't it? So the next time I walk into a meeting at 9:10, what do you think Jared's doing? He's looking at me going, "Hang on, Ruzi's just told me to be there at 5 to 9." So the part of the coaching, which I think is the big missing piece sometimes in what leadership is coaching. You know, if we start coaching is about systemizing, is about feedback. Josh, I know you wanted to jump on too.
Yeah, just in that point in relation to what we've been chatting about, I think one of the key things, people aren't prepared when they're either placed or they're given leadership roles to
100%.
be able to take on all these things we've just spoken about. I think that preparation is so critically important so that they understand that they are going to be these role models, regardless, you know, of the position they're in these senior parts of an organisation. So that's where that's a fundamental failure.
100%. I think, again, we teach the technical skills of, I went to Donvale High School, Donvale Primary School, Donvale High School, went to Footscray Institute of Technology, and no one's teaching leadership, Josh, to your point. So unless we have this awareness, and that's why I compliment all you guys for being on this course, because, again, I've spoken to all of you, except probably for Adam one-on-one, is, like the fact that you're here learning and developing is a great opportunity because you're going to be so far ahead. I see so many leaders that have, and then what do? They do everyone else's work because they're so used to being the marketing guy, the IT guy, the comms guy, the sales guy. And it's then really hard, Josh, as you said, to become a leader because the easiest thing for me to do is go out and see all the clients. But hang on, that's not your job, Ruzi. Your job is to empower everyone in the business. I think, Josh, to your point, I think that's one of the biggest impediments for role model leadership because we're just not sure when we get to this role. Trev, what does authenticity mean? Not many people really understand that. What does empowerment mean? Shit, I prefer to go out on the road and meet clients than help my salespeople become better salespeople because no one's ever taught me to do that. So I reckon, Josh, you've hit the nail on the head. That's probably the main thing I was going to say. And then what's really easy to do is look at the scoreboard, isn't it? It's just easy to look at the scoreboard and to continue to become really technical. Oh, guys, we haven't made our budget, so we need to sell more. Okay, what does that mean, Ruzi? Well, I don't know, just go out and sell more. Yeah, but how are you going to help me? Oh, bugger it, I'll do it myself. It's that mentality, isn't it? Instead of, guys, we didn't make our budget this month, but I've looked back over the numbers. The reason we didn't is because we probably didn't make enough calls. Does everyone understand that? All right, because what our data tells us, if we make 100 phone calls a week, we generally convert at 30%, and out of that, blah, 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 blah. That's what a leader does. And I'm going to take some responsibility. I'll probably take my eye off the ball. I haven't had my one-on-one meetings with you guys for a while. Yeah, I haven't sort of followed up. I haven't asked great questions. I've probably been too bogged down in stuff that's irrelevant. See the different conversation? But the easiest thing is for everyone is just to go and do shit, isn't it? It's the player-coach syndrome. Yeah, and thankfully, although I probably still would have got a game at Melbourne when I was coaching Melbourne, but like you can't if you're coach of a footy club, you can't run down and play. You can't. You physically can't. So you have to find ways to become a good leader. Now, if you don't, what happens? You get the sack, basically. So there's no. So the board can't sit there and go, yeah, but Ruzzi's is still a good player. Well, no, he's not a good player because he's not playing. Whereas in the corporate world, we can probably still do that, can't we? The board can, I know Trav's not a great leader, but he's our best salesman. Yeah, hang on, that's not his role. If why don't we just pay him as the best salesman and not pay him as the CEO then? See what I'm saying? So it's still easy to reward for the wrong things, and I think that's one of the big things that I see. Jared, do you want to jump in?
No. Yeah. I'm actually interested. Travis made a comment before. When you're talking about this, I'm in a new role at the moment, where I've come from a family business where we all knew what our roles were, and I was probably in a position where I was doing a lot, and I'm now in a new role where I've taken over and I'm a manager in training, and under my banner I've got I've got a great team, but I've got a couple of unicorns. They're just phenomenal, and to be really transparent and a little bit vulnerable in the situation, I'm going to say, one of these girls that I have working under me should be our leader. Right. She should be managing this business. She started this business, worked her way through, but she just doesn't have the confidence to take the role. Hence, he reached out. And I'm in a position where I nearly need to go to my boss and say, mate, she needs to run this business. She's phenomenal. Yeah. And there's a little bit of low self-esteem from me coming from that situation of always working in it to now just bringing the best out of people, if that makes sense.
Just make sure she's ready though, because I think, again, this is what I would say to this, Jared, based on my experience. When the heat is on is when you don't know how people are going to perform. So I think your role at the moment, if I can give you some advice, is to find her some learnings, find her a course, I'd be training her. So it's a bit like, Adam, your question on Dean Cox before. Don't presume they're ready. I learn a lot with David Noble.
She's clearly not. She's clearly not. She would have probably taken the role.
Exactly. But what you have done is rightly identified her. This is a succession plan a bit. It's a great conversation. Almost, we've sort of got 5 minutes to finish, and we'll finish on this because I think what you found is someone within the business that's a successor. So I would strategize.
That's a good comment. That's a really good comment. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would.
You're right.
Yeah, I'd strategize with her without telling her, and I would strategize. How can I help you? What can I do for you? Are we doing enough for you? You don't want to lose her, but you don't want to promote her yet.
She's been there for 12 years.
Yeah,
and in today's world, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. But maybe she's waiting. Don't underestimate your importance in her journey. Maybe she's waiting for Jared Michael to walk in and wrap their arms around her and say, "What can I do for you? How can I help you? How can I make you better? Because your potential is enormous." So I think you've got a big role to play, mate, in this young lady's career.
Just on that point, Paul. Sorry, Jared. I was just doing that. Find out what her motivation is, because her motivation might not be to be that high CEO type role. Her motivation may be an operational tactical role. That's where she excels. I've got a construction manager. It's probably the best construction manager I've ever worked for in any type of work. He doesn't want to be anything more than a construction manager.
Good point.
And he's absolutely brilliant at what he does. He's got the capability to be a COO and all. He said, "No, that's not me. I like to build stuff. That's what I'm going to do."
Yeah, mate. I actually took that role from the first session I did. This is a credit to you, Paul, and thanks, Josh. Is one of the things is go and sit down with your staff independently and have a chat with them. And I did that with this girl, and I said, "What do you want to do?" She goes, "I just want to help people. I just get a kick out of out of servicing clients. She goes, I just love that. I just went, all she wants to do.
Yeah, that's good. But make sure you're using her strength, mate. Like this is a great, really great conversation, guys. Appreciate this. This is awesome because this is what I'm here to do and share information with you, get Josh's input and Travis and all you guys on here. So this has been amazing. So yeah, I think you're doing a great job, Jared. Doing a great job. And I think to Josh's point, yep.
Can I throw one more at you? The subject that Travis just touched on, and it was a bit to do with a discussion you and I had the other day. He said, really struggle to be consistent. Now, this young girl's going to make me accountable to be consistent.
Yep.
And it goes against my profile. It's bloody hard. It is.
Yeah.
It's bloody hard.
Yeah, and that's a good. Okay, so for those of you who haven't done the profiling, which probably Trav, I don't know who has got to that level yet. I'm a green blue. Now green is, I know, so green's we call a dove, blue's an owl. So analytical, dove is like a people person. So there's blue, which is dove, blue is owl, dove is green, peacock is yellow, which is sort of sales, and red is the eagle. So I'm a green blue, high green blue. Okay, very much a people person and analytical. What color is AFL footy? Red. It's a red industry. So what I learned, Jared, is where the consistency comes in is do it in the morning. The difficult tasks that are outside your normal profile, do when you've got good energy. All right. So when I was giving feedback to players, it was always in the morning. If I had to drop a player, come in early in the morning if I have to have a difficult conversation. I didn't know that at the time. It was just a system that I adopted, but that's what they tell you to do. So the hard tasks do in the morning when you've got plenty of energy. And that's where that consistency comes from. Because I guarantee where the inconsistency will come from is you'll kick the can down the road and you'll go, I'll do it at 4 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. And you'll go, no, I'm too tired to do it today. And you will be.
When you're tired. Yeah, not good.
You're not good. So do the difficult tasks outside. So for an eagle, for a red, feedback's easy, but it's pretty brutal. And they'll just give it any time. All right. But for people like myself and you, who are probably similar personalities, we need to set up, and you have to have your feedback there. And that's where the consistency, Travis, comes in. I've got my notes. I've got my feedback. I remember I had a really good discussion with Jack Grimes, who was captain at the time. I had to drop him. And he came in. He was pretty angry about it. He said, well, I'm better than such and such. I said, Jack, you know the biggest problem is, Jack? You're judging yourself on other people who are really not that good. Yes, you're better than him, but do you want to be the best Jack Grimes, or do you just want to be better than – we were a 2-win team before I got there. Does that make sense? But I knew what I wanted to say. I knew the message I wanted to give him. I knew the standards I want to hold him to. We disagreed. You know, he came back in the next day and said, Ruzi, you're right. You know, I need to hold myself accountable, not to the 21st best player at Melbourne, just so I could get the 22nd spot, to the best player I need to be. All right. So does that make sense, Jared?
Yeah, that's a phrase one of my leaders said back in the distribution circles, Ruzi, when people would sort of fall a little bit, tend to fall onto the being okay, or being okay with being okay, you might say. He'd say, okay, how are you travelling, or what do you think of this week's result or this month's result, or how we're tracking so far? And they, like you said before, on some other topic, would be, we're not going too bad, or whatever. It's going okay, But he'd then come back and scale compared to what. Yeah, that was always his line. Compared to what? So what are you saying that to?
What's your benchmark?
Yeah, correct. What's your benchmark? You're going okay compared to what? Like if it's compared to as good as, because what you should ultimately be trying to do is compared to the best you think is possible.
We can do. Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, we're going shithouse. Then if that's what I'm comparing it to. So that was always a good one that resonated with me there.
Yeah, good point, guys. Mate, I'm always a fickler for time, as you guys know, because I appreciate everyone's time. That was awesome. That hour's gone real quick. So that's a great session, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Adam, for jumping on. Adam, Trav, Josh, Jared, really appreciate it. Have a great Christmas. If I don't see you before
my first session, good to meet you guys.
Yeah, well done, Travis. And we'll shut it
welcome,
down for a month now, and then try and catch up on the modules if you can, if you haven't done them. And
Yep.
then I've probably got Ivan Cleary kicking off mid-Jan for our Q&A, which will be awesome. So I'm really looking forward to it. But have a great Christmas. Thanks for being
Thank
on.
you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks all.
guys.
See you, everyone. Have a
Bye.
great Christmas.
Bye.
Bye,
See
guys.
ya.